Good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Hudson, and I'm very proud to be a board member of the Minnesota Alliance on Problem Gambling. I'm also a person with lived experience, and so I'm very grateful for all of you for being here and for our panelists this morning as well. Previously, we heard from Dr. King and Dr. Malcolm about some of the emergence of new data about normalization of increased gambling activity, specifically among adolescents and young adults. And now we're going to shift gears a little bit to talk with people who are on the front lines, working with young adults every day. And each of them comes with a slightly different angle. I'm going to introduce each of them, and then they'll each tell you a little bit more about themselves as well. So we're going to start with Jeff Wasserman right here. Jeff has been at the MNAPG conference before. He is a former attorney. He is a person with lived experience. He hosts 7 to 8 virtual recovery meetings every week, specifically for young adults affected by gambling harm. He also co-hosts the All In the Addicted Gambling podcast. And if any of you were here 2 years ago, Jeff was here and they actually hosted a live session of that podcast here. He is also the Judicial Outreach and Development Director for the Delaware Council on Gambling Problems. So joining Jeff will be Robby Fuqua from TELUS Health. And Robby is a problem gambling treatment provider whose clientele is heavily skewed to young men who have developed problem gambling. In addition, he also provides Minnesota monthly data for the state problem gambling helpline, which TELUS operates. And joining Robby and Jeff is Saul Malek. Saul is a young man who developed gambling disorder and addiction while in college. He has been in recovery since 2019, and Saul now goes around the country talking to young people, talking to educators about the dangers. I actually saw Saul on the Dr. Phil show, so he comes all the way to Minnesota today. I will go ahead and turn things over to Jeff, who will moderate the panel, and hope you enjoy.
Thank you, Jeff. It's great to be back in Minnesota. It may seem a little strange that somebody that looks like me is starting a conversation about youth gambling, but hopefully you'll hear my experience as well as the experiences of my fellow panelists. Well, good morning, everyone. And on behalf of my fellow panelists, both Robby and Saul, it's our honor to welcome you to our session and definitely invite you to join the conversation, because this is what this session is about. It's about having the conversation. But first, before I begin, where's Susan? I wanted to give a shout out to Susan Sheridan Tucker if you're here. If not, I'll still give you the shout out for just doing an amazing job, and for the team at the Minnesota Alliance for not only putting on a fantastic conference, but to have the focus on young adult gambling, to me, is so vitally important given today's gambling world. So to all of you who are joining us today, whether you are an addiction counselor or other mental health professional, you may be an educator, a college athletic coach, a parent, a person that really wants to raise their awareness about problem gambling. Your presence reflects our shared commitment to not only get a better understanding, but to be able to address gambling addiction among young adults. And to those like me who have experience in the breadth and scope of gambling-related harm, including and especially family members and affected others. A heartfelt thank you for being here. You remind us what is truly at stake when gambling moves from casual entertainment to a harmful and life-altering addiction. Now, we've already heard, as was said by two outstanding presenters, Drs. King and Malkin, and about the incredibly important research and data that they gather on gambling addiction among young adults. But our session is going to shift from data to dialogue. And again, I can't encourage you enough to join in our conversation. Don't be shy, and ask the questions. Share your thoughts, your experiences, etc. We'll explore on the front lines of gambling addiction our experiences, and as you can probably tell, each of us have different experiences in the evolving gambling landscape. We have new approaches to talk to you about in terms of prevention and new pathways in terms of recovery. Together, we'll bring these three perspectives and experiences to help frame the conversation. So over the next hour or so, again, we invite you to listen with compassion and a sense of curiosity, but more importantly, to participate with us. So with that framing in mind, let's begin. As I mentioned earlier, each of us on this panel brings a unique lens to this issue, shaped by different experiences and journeys that led us here. Both Saul and I are in recovery from gambling addiction, though to no one's surprise, from very different stages in life. Saul, the only one of us who still can be qualified as a young adult, devotes much of his time and energy to reaching out to young people, many of whom see their own struggles in Saul's story. And I found recovery later in life and now serve, and there's been some conversation which I loved about the importance of peer work. Who are the peers that are here that want to encourage more peer roles in gambling addiction recovery? I'm totally on board. And I myself am a certified peer recovery specialist, and I facilitate, as was said, an online support group that connects people, particularly young people, who are looking for ways to stop gambling. Now, as I said, I am the peer guy, Saul is the young guy, and Robby is the clinician. And Robby's experience is just as important because he's on the front lines, not in terms of any lived experience in gambling addiction, but because he treats many young males who have a gambling addiction that originated from betting on sports. And he helps them navigate both the consequences of harmful gambling and the social pressures that can hinder recovery. So I'll begin by sharing a little bit about my own story, and then we'll, of course, hear from Robby and Saul as they bring their perspectives to the conversation. Like many of us who've struggled with gambling addiction, when I first gambled, addiction was nowhere on the radar. It started innocently enough as entertainment, something fun, maybe a way to make a few extra dollars, but also a way to unwind from stress, especially when I began law school back in the Stone Age. It was a way for me to relieve some of the pressures that I was experiencing. You know, some of my peers were doing that at the bar, but I was doing that at the casino. It was something that I convinced myself that I could and always would be able to control. But over time, it became something entirely different. Gambling stopped being fun, and it stopped being about winning, as strange as that may sound. For me, it was an escape from stress, from fear, from disappointment, from things I didn't want to face. What once felt like a release slowly became a trap. Now, what gives me the hope and courage today is what I see from young people who show up to the meetings that I offer. I see a lot of open, honest sharing. I see people that are willing to change. Their strength inspires me to keep showing up too. Now, young people today face many challenges when it comes to gambling addiction. Quite frankly, many of the challenges that I didn't face, because the challenges today are fueled by technology, technological influences, cultural influences, easy access, not only to gamble, but easier access to hide problem gambling behaviors. When I gambled at a physical casino, part of my routine was to create more and more lies. I had to tell my wife where I was on a weeknight at 2 o'clock in the morning. Now, she thought I was the hardest working attorney in the state of Delaware. And she also knew that she wouldn't be able to really contact me because I convinced her at that time that our, internet services were not that great, and I certainly wasn't going to answer the office phone because it's hooked up to the answering service. All of these creative lies to hide my gambling. Today, if I gambled online, I could be sitting next to her in our family room. She could be scrolling, looking at emails or things online, and I could be gambling, and she would not have a clue. And that, to me, is a huge part of the challenges that young adult gamblers have. It is easy to gamble, and it is easy to hide gambling. And that's what, quite frankly, we're faced with today. So, while my story reflects the consequences of gambling over a long career, if you call it a career, what we're seeing today, especially among young adults, looks very, very different. That's where Robby comes in. As a clinician, he's working every day with individuals who are struggling, many young male sports bettors, caught up in a culture that normalizes gambling as part of fandom and competition and even identity. I remember the first time that I heard from one of the members of my support group that the term degenerate gambler in his circle is not looked upon negatively. They wear it as a badge of honor. Whoever gambles the most has the admiration from many others in that stage of life, and that is certainly troubling. But Robby brings invaluable insight to what these young men are experiencing, the pressures that they face, the emotional toll, and how recovery can look when the problem begins so early in life. Robby, I'll turn it over to you to share about what you're seeing in your work and what stands out most about the new wave of young gambling-related harm.
Thanks, Chair. How's everyone doing today? Great speakers, right? Thank you, Jeff. You know, it's an honor to be up here speaking with these men, one younger, two older. And to hear the different perspectives. And like Jeff said, this is, I was talking about this last night at the speakers and the board dinner, how this is kind of, I just want to say, falling in my lap with sports addiction disorder, and what I'm seeing out in the field right now. During the day, I work for TELUS Health. I'm the trainer for the states that we serve. One of them is Minnesota. We operate the Problem Gambling Helpline. And I actually also put together the reports as well. Late afternoons and evenings, I'm in my office, telehealth, seeing a lot of young men, Gen Z, middle-aged. And before I get started here, I do want to say this, whatever you want to call it, disease, addiction, disorder, does not discriminate amongst gender. I'm just going to share with you my experience of what I'm seeing right now, which is mostly young adult males. Current athletes, former athletes, and what that's looking like, right now out there. And really, I want to thank Jeff for the work he's doing out there, because he knows about my work, because I think peer-based groups is something, I'm biased, by the way, 12-step bias, peer-based group bias, I'll just say that. And I know it complements a great clinical program, so he sees a lot of the folks that I see. But I want to talk a little bit about what the draw is, and let me get to the slides here and what I'm seeing out there. Okay, so first I want to go back and talk about this conference a couple years ago, because this kind of told me about what we're seeing out there with gambling addiction, or gambling addiction disorder and sports betting. So I was on a flight. I want to say this conference a couple years ago was on a Thursday night. And I flew in the back of a plane with a team of young men. I won't say the university. I won't say the sport. But for 2.5 hours back to Boston, you know what I heard? I didn't hear anything about girlfriends. I didn't hear anything about boyfriends. I didn't hear anything about mixers. Listen, when I was in college, it was all about Greek life. I understand that, but they didn't talk about parties. All they were talking about was where they were going to place their bet. All they were talking about was DraftKings or FanDuel. What do I do here? Where's the free money? Hey man, didn't you have a bookie, that offsite bookie? 2.5 hours. Heaven forbid I didn't hear anything about studying or school, right? That's all I heard. It's a different world now, And just like Dr. Malkin said, it's this thing. It's this thing, right? One of the big things, and it's just not sports betting. Now I'm going to lean on sports betting because that's who I see and what I work with. But it's online gambling. We're just in a different world now. I just spoke at Boston College, where I went to grad school, a couple weeks ago. It was like the day after the NBA thing with Chauncey Billups. You guys all know about that? And by the way, how many clinicians do I forgot to ask this. How many, okay? Good to know? Okay. How many Minnesota Vikings fans do we have out here? Seriously, sports fans, Timberwolves fans. Saul and I are going to the game tonight. I'm really excited. Okay. That's good to know, because I'm going to talk about being a fan as well while I'm up here. But as a fan, this really upsets me, and excuse my language, pisses me off. I'm scared as a fan what we're seeing out there jeopardizing the legitimacy of sports. I love sports. I can't call myself a current athlete right now because of my golf handicap. I no longer run marathons anymore, but I love sports. I changed careers to go back into working in the addiction field. And years ago, when I went back to school to get my MSW, I had no idea it was going to be gambling. I went into work for a company called BDA, and they said, "What do you know about gambling addiction?" And I went, "Gambling what?" That was 2014, and here I am now speaking to you about this condition, this disorder, because it's real. Because the first guy that I had on the line from North Carolina had told me he had just lost $42,000 at a casino, and he was sobbing. I'll never forget that feeling. I went, okay, it's game on, because it's real. But let's get back to what this is doing to the industry. Jeopardizing the industry. As a fan, it upsets me. It makes me angry. As a clinician, it scares me, because I know what this addiction disorder can do, all the way to suicide attempts, right? So it's not about if the Vikings are going to win Sunday, right now. It's whether the over-under hits. That's what we're seeing out there now. This product, this dangerous product, has been created by this industry. Once it was legalized, and I know it across the pond, it was legalized years before, they were already developing these very dangerous products. Very dangerous, right? There are people like us on the other side who know things about dopaminergic pathways. They create these things, right? Technological people who understand this. Again, set off from the legalization, and then there's the commercialization. I'm licensed in Massachusetts. I live in Boston. I'm also licensed in Illinois, so I see a lot of Cubs fans and a lot of Red Sox fans, right? I had Robert Jacobson, he's the executive director of the California Council. He visited me about a month ago. He came over and we walked to Fenway. I wanted to show him give him a tour of the park, not me, but the Boston Red Sox. The first thing Robert noticed when we walked into Fenway, when I walked into Fenway the first time, I thought, holy crap, Babe Ruth played here, right? This is an incredible stadium. I know you guys are probably Twins fans. I'm not a Red Sox fan either. If you hear my Southern drawl, I'm from Texas. I'm a Rangers fan. But the first thing Robert saw was that big, I think it's DraftKings, on the green monster in the middle. He goes, well, look at that. I said, yeah, you know, the commercialization of these products. I love watching the NBA on TV. I love watching Charles Barkley. I love watching Shaq. But they're talking every quarter on the over-under, right? Imagine with this addiction disorder and seeing all this. So this industry has created this product. And I love Dr. King's analogy that she talked on, I think it was with food, with sports betting, but with my background, the way I see in-game sports betting to the industry is what crack cocaine was to powder cocaine back in the 80s. It's faster. It's more accessible. It's so very, very quick. I wrote this slide back in 2017, I think, or 18, before it was even, PASPA was overturned. The two things that make these products so dangerous, the two inherent characteristics are the accessibility and then how fast you can bet every 3 to 5 seconds at a Twins game. Most of my guys, the binges they go on, listen, you don't have to wait for your drug dealer to wake up. You don't have to wait for the liquor store to open. 2:30 a.m., you start thinking about your grades, you start thinking about chasing. There you go. It's right there. It's right there because of the accessibility. And you can make a bet within 10 seconds and then make another bet within 10 seconds. And in fact, we could probably do it right now. There's probably a table tennis game going on in Germany or somewhere. I mean, we laugh about that, but it's serious. Sports betting cousins is what I call this. All my guys come to me with this. Yeah. Crypto. And really, when I go all the way down, a lot of my even current athletes, it's action, action, action. And I get that because I love that. But you have this pathology, this genetic predisposition, when those pathways are very sensitive to risk on an uncertain event with a larger return, what happens? And a lot of my clients, we have to walk through, hey, Rob, can I do this? Can I do that? But this is very common amongst a lot of my clients. And I will tell you, where this starts off is I have a hybrid approach. The term harm reduction still scares the hell out of me coming from the substance use disorder world. But a lot of times with harm reduction, one of my mentors in this industry said, hey, it's okay with the long-term goal of harm reduction to be abstinence, right? And I've had some success with some things, not with a lot of these, if they want to stop sports betting, but things with like traditional fantasy sports. But more will be revealed as we go along with this, right? So we have to work through a lot of these things. Stock options, day trading. And listen, day trading and stock options, I've got right now someone on my caseload who tried to run their car into a wall over stock options. Very slippery slope, very scary stuff. And what I see with day traders and sports bettors or stock option guys, right, and stock traders and sports bettors, they're kind of common because they use their information and their knowledge and they think they have way more control over what's going to happen than they really do, right? And I want to steal this from Jeff last night because we were talking about this. Someone who's really, let's say, knowledgeable about sports, right? And we were saying, you know, a lot of times they may hit on certain things that they really know, especially like my current athletes. But if you have this genetic predisposition, we'll call it, you know, and you start off with a win and then you end up and you look down and it's 2:30 in the morning and again, you're betting on that table tennis game over in Tokyo, something's wrong, right? That's the difference. So is this the perfect storm or perfect watch? Let me check my time. You know, I think I'm okay. So I see a lot of young adult males, and I found this, actually, Tiffany Reddick, my colleague, sent me this great article. It's neat. It's not being education, employment, or any type of vocational training. And what this article talked about, there's 2 million NEETs, young adult Gen Z males. And a lot of times they are disillusioned with the job market, of course, everything that's involved with that. Scared about everything that's going on in 2025. I mean, I could list it, you know. But what I find just crazy is they put their hopes and false sense of control into an uncertain event versus working with higher living costs, the economy, job market, and just the general uncertainties of living in 2025. I'm not going to even talk about politics and the government shutting down. I hope I get to fly home and see my wife tomorrow in Boston. But there's a lot of scary stuff going on right now, right? You hear from this generation, well, AI is going to be taking over in 5 years anyways. Why do I need to even look at a job, right? Why should I even try? And I wrote this center square just the other night after one of my sessions with one of my young men that I see. And we get to talking about why. And it's different from substance use disorder, you know. It does, some of this is escape, but some of this is strategy. Dr. Malkin talked a little bit to this. The answers are in the big win. That's why I'm gonna go down burning, right? The answer's in the big win with an escape. But then when you do, and I have this saying too with a lot of my clients. I had it was a D2 or D3 outside linebacker. He was a bookie. I'm going to be careful with the amounts, but what woke him up in the middle of the night, he told me, was the amount that he was up that he could not hold on to versus what he lost. It was a 6-figure number, and he was 20 years old. And he said, that's what keeps him up at night, what he had and he lost. And I said, whatever you won and whatever you win on dopamine, guess what? You're going to lose on dopamine. The door's open. The door's open, right? So that's what I'm seeing. I'm going to skip through this because I want to make sure I stay within my time here. The reasons, everything from boredom, again, strategy, money, sports. Let's make this much more interesting. I'm going to speak to this real quick. And then stress. It can start with boredom, you know, and go back to boredom. But there's several reasons. But what I really wanted to get to, I just published my first book. It's not a clinical textbook or an industry book. This book is written for the folks that I see. The 21-year-old who might think they have a gambling problem because they just stole $2,000 from mom, right? The meat of my book, the third section, I talk a lot about this. I don't look at this as harm reduction, watching sports, or even or even participating in sports. I talk a lot about how you can maintain a level of competitiveness and not have action in the game you're playing. Or how do you maintain being a Twins fan and going to the ballpark and enjoying it in recovery? You know, it's very similar to working with someone with, let's say, alcohol use disorder. How do I socialize at a party without a beer in my hand? So I saw a lot, I see, not saw, I did saw, I see, and will see more, probably more of these cases of how do you do that? It's walking on 2 feet for a while. How do I separate that, right? I write about focusing on the storylines, not the betting lines. One of the young men I see right now, D3, I got to be careful, but D3 quarterback. What I told him, it might have been last year, before he went to camp, I said, I want you focusing on defenses and their strategy, not the over-under, man. You know, because the preoccupation of this condition takes them out of their life. And again, I go back to what Michelle said. Yeah, some of it's money, but this crap gets in their way of achieving whatever they need to do. So a lot of my work is this, right? Separating fandom, separating the action from being a fan and an athlete. And the last thing I'm going to talk about real quickly, because I don't know how much time I have, I'm going to turn to my monitor. Am I okay? Okay. Is a process addiction approach. And again, I'm not a researcher. I'm not a prevention guy. I'm a treatment guy. I love coming to these. You know why? Well, number one, CEUs. I'm an ICGC. I'm a social worker. I'm an LICSW. But I use things from like Dr. King and Dr. Malkin and Jeff Wasserman to make me a better treatment provider, because my enemy is addiction disease, no more, no less. We're all on the same team, man. And that makes me a better trainer for telehealth, you know? And I learned with process addiction disorders, there's an approach. And I take this from Jody Bechtold because she trained me correctly with this, believe me. There's really 3 areas that we have to concentrate on, and I do with my sports bettors. Walls that you put up. Now, I created a 4th wall. It's sports viewing access, and I'm going to start there. So if I have a Minnesota Viking fan, which we don't have a lot in New England, but if I did, and we're talking about Sunday and what they're going to watch, or we're talking about last Sunday and what they did watch, I get it why you're watching the Packer game. You want to see them lose. I get why you obviously want to watch the Viking game. You want to see them win. But why are you watching the Patriots? They're in the AFC. Now, I get it. If they play football or they enjoy it. But what I've learned, too, with a lot of the athletes, former athletes, and fans, they need to go back to find out why they're a Vikings fan. I've got an exercise in my book about that. And then relearn the behavior, which it's possible. It takes time. But why are you watching that? And I told Jeff this today. I love to hear this from my clients. Well, Robby, I did watch the Viking game, but then I got bored. Thank God. That's what I want to hear. What do we do with that boredom? Let's talk about this. Well, I wanted to watch another game, but what? What did you do? Did you cook dinner for your wife and kids? Did you go work out? Did you read a book? Whatever the holistic approach, whatever direction I need to go into. Yeah. So we got to put up parameters around their sports viewing. Can they go and watch a Timberwolves game? Can they be in an arena and be safe, right? So that's the first wall. We go up to, or the first wall I'm discussing, but the other one's money. And putting up the boundaries to really cut back on their exposure to discretionary income. I mean, a lot of my clients have that TrueLink card. Do you guys know what the TrueLink card is? We redirect their salaries and all their money to a loved one to manage that. They get a credit card where they get an allowance. A lot of times I just start from the bottom and move up. My wife sees everything. Mom sees everything. Good. We're going to keep the eyes and see how this works. And if they get too much exposure to their discretionary money and we see a slip, guess what? We turn up the heat. Remember that TrueLink credit card I talked about when we did that assessment? Guess what? Right? So money's the second wall. Time, structuring time, when they're vulnerable. We all know about what's played on Sunday. I pick on the NFL. I love the NFL. I'm from Dallas. I'm a Cowboys fan. Don't throw anything at me, but, right? So that's something to consider. Thanks, Jeff. And then one more thing is online access. We've been talking about this all morning. Gamban. Whatever's going to block it, right? A lot of my clients have figured that out. But if that wall's just high enough that they can fight through that trigger, let's do that. Self-exclusion, whatever we can do to block. And then once we get all these blocks in, then we're going to start peeling that onion back and getting the real work done. Okay, so the clinical perspective is one thing. What Jeff talked about with his groups and the great work he's doing is another thing. I want to introduce Saul. Yep. Yep. So here's Jeff. He'll introduce Saul. Thank you, everyone.
I actually wanted to introduce Saul because Saul and I have a history. We first met in 2018, and the way we met is we connected on Reddit. If anybody has familiarity with the website Reddit, I would encourage you to visit the Problem Gambling, what they call subreddit, and read some of the posts. If you want to know where young adults are and the struggles that they're sharing, it is absolutely eye-opening. And just with that in mind, we happen to have had in our support group as a guest speaker the person that runs that subreddit. So before he spoke, I was looking at some of the posts, and this one really touched me, and that's an understatement. So I'll try to get through it without the emotion, but it's not going to be easy. The subject line was, "Gambling took my dream." Dear Mom and Dad, I don't know how to start this letter. I've kept so much inside me for so long, but I can't keep pretending anymore. I want you to know the truth, not because I'm proud of it, but because I'm tired of hiding. In 2022, I started gambling with just $100. It seemed small, harmless, even exciting. I won that first time, and I thought maybe luck had finally smiled on me. I wanted to earn more, to make life better for us. But that small win became the beginning of something that destroyed me. Slowly, I lost control. My stakes got bigger, my thoughts darker. I started lying to others and to myself. I borrowed money to repay debts, but I used it again for gambling. And now I've even spent my upcoming salary before I earned it. Mom, Dad, I want you to know something from my heart. I'm not a bad person. I didn't gamble because I didn't care. I gambled because I was weak and I didn't know how to stop. Every time I lost, I felt guilty. Every time I promised to quit, I meant it. But I always fell again. I see you both. It breaks me inside. You've worked so hard, loved me so much, and trusted me completely. I was supposed to take care of this family. I'm the only son. I wanted to make your life better, but gambling took everything from me. My peace, my savings, my future. Sometimes I look in the mirror and I can't recognize myself. I see a man who's drowning in shame, but still has a heart that wants to make things right. I don't want to live like this anymore. I want to change for you, for our family, for myself. I don't know how long it'll take, but I promise I'll fight this addiction. One day at a time. I just want you to know that your son still loves you deeply. I've lost money, but I haven't lost my heart. I still believe I can become the son you deserve. I mean, incredible, right? This is the stuff that happens, and it's not unique, and maybe not everybody shares their letters on Reddit, but they certainly write them and think about them. So that brings me to Saul, because Saul, you represent a newer generation of recovery, one that's growing up in a digital world where gambling is woven into everyday life through sports, social media, constant access on our phones. Now, Saul's in his 20s. He's in recovery from gambling addiction himself, long-term recovery, especially given your age. And what does he do? He spends so much time and effort speaking at schools. And yes, I do remember you were on Dr. Phil. And more importantly, in colleges, reaching out to young people in ways that only someone who's been there truly can. So thank you for being here, for helping others. I'd love for you to share a bit about your story and what you're seeing as you connect with young people.
All right, thank you. I want to make sure I respect everyone's time. What time are we taking questions?
Anytime.
Oh, anytime. Okay. So I won't go into too much minutia on my own story. I'm Saul Malek. I'm 27 years old, and I, as Jeff mentioned, have been in recovery since July of 2019, but I started my journey with Gamblers Anonymous and with addiction prior to that. My first ever GA meeting was in August of 2018. With that in mind, I understand for young people that becoming addicted, having a problem, and certainly seeking help is something that is not immediate fix. My experience speaking at schools, that's what I do now. I present in high schools and colleges. And in my efforts, I've noticed that many students, especially the young men that I speak with, don't have a desire to fully disengage with the gambling around them. Rather, they are looking for ways to capture the elements of gambling that are so attractive while also avoiding the pitfalls of entering addiction. So in my work, I find that I am most effective at reaching these young adults by meeting them where they are. And so I call it cattle theory, communicate at their level. I mean, if you've ever had a juicy steak at a restaurant, it comes from the top of the line cattle. And so I say the best message comes from the best cattle. If you can meet students where they are and communicate at their level. And how that's accomplished, I do this by speaking from the vantage point of someone who not only has been there, but also understands the appeal that gambling has. And so, you know, I'm sure people are familiar with the traditional stereotypical approach of having some person speak at a school and you know, they show the marks of injections and things, and they say, don't do drugs, or they're this completely abstinence-based approach that I don't believe recognizes where students are. And so in my presentations, what I found especially effective is talking about not only the lows of my gambling experience, but also the early benefits that I had. The feeling like I fit in with my peers, the fact that I went to a rigorous prep school where all my friends were going to be consultants and finance guys, and that gambling to me was my element of success that I could report back to my parents. And when I incorporate all these things, I feel, and I mean, it's not really just my feeling because I've also asked students for surveys after these presentations, but it's my understanding that these students can connect with these feelings. I want to fit in. I want to be part of a social group, especially for the young men that feel that the only way to socialize is to talk about sports betting or be in fantasy leagues. And so acknowledging that, I think, at least gives us some common ground to have that conversation where I highlight both the positives and the negatives, and then in sharing my experience of addiction, of being young and really isolated from the rest of the world in my own thoughts and destructive behavior, I feel that I can get students to see a very clear picture of where that's going. I fully recognize not everyone in the audience is a 27-year-old male who has the same life experience that I do. And so when I talk to people who work with younger adults, my encouragement is to always find some sort of common ground from your own experience. And I feel that that's how I've been able to also reach female identifying students, is that maybe they're not gambling, but it's a pretty universal sentiment as a young person on how do you fit in, or how do you find escape or enjoyment. And so I think for anyone who works with young people to find that common ground is important. Now I don't want to ramble on and take too much time, but I will report on some of the things that I am seeing from speaking with schools. One of those things that really stands out to me is the line between gambling and investing is not as clear as maybe one would think. And I do make a point of not just talking about sports betting because that's my own experience, but also diving into the stock market or the cryptocurrencies, or do you think it's investing to be a sports bettor because you're a fan of a team, things like that. And for me, I guess because I'm away from gambling now for a handful of years, I see it pretty clearly. This is what investing is, this is what gambling is. But students will even still ask, after I've made a fairly clear explanation, they'll say, well, what about, like Robinhood and this? Is that investing? Is that gambling? And so I think that the actual definition of gambling and what is harmful is something that should be very clearly elaborated on when speaking to young people. And I'll say this one other point here, and then, I don't want to take too much time. I know I'm sure the audience has a lot on their mind, but what I think is especially noteworthy is that calling something gambling or not gambling, I think misses the mark when trying to prevent harm in young people. Really what I've found is more effective is this behavior harmful? Is it detracting from your quality of life, or is it not? And that could be, I asked the question of parents. I heard at a school, a mom said, well, my son is in 4 fantasy football leagues. Do you think that is a problem? Is that gambling? And I said, well, I think you have to consider the nuance of your particular situation. So all of that to say, I think it's less about demonizing the kid that places a $5 bet on a game of poker with friends on the weekend versus, are they checking constantly their fantasy team for months, and every night they don't sit at the table with their parents because they're so preoccupied. And so I find that that's a better explanation to kids is, would you consider the impact of your behavior and whether or not it's something you can distance yourself from, or you feel drawn to it and you can't quit. And so I think that way, at least it's not like the stigma, this label of, oh, I'm gambling, therefore bad, therefore, I have a problem and I need to hide it. And so that's something else I've seen with schools. But all of that to say, I know we have maybe 10 minutes or so, so I figured we'd open the floor up if anyone had videos. Oh, we have videos. Oh, then we have videos. Okay, great. All right. Thanks.
Thanks, Saul. This is a lesson on an old person and technology. All right. These video clips are from members of my support group who voluntarily agreed to share some of their experiences with the hope of giving a message to others. This young man who's in his early 30s, and by the way, the videos that you'll see, they happen to have all been sports bettors when they were gambled. This young man is going to first share his experience with sports betting.
When I first started betting, I remember it pretty vividly. I was betting on college basketball, and I had been dabbling in pools that someone was setting up for some NFL games and some NCAA games. And then I remember one specific pool where you would pick college football games, and you would pick the spread on like 8 or so different games. And then at the end of the year, the person who won the most would win something. So I think the pools are what slowly led me into that. And then when I found out I could just gamble on my phone, it was like the pools on steroids, basically. And it just gave me such a bigger rush. And in the beginning, I didn't think it was an issue at all. I didn't even think gambling could be addictive. I just thought I was making the games I was watching a little bit more fun. I spent so much time watching college basketball because I was placing bets all season. So I had thought that just my attention to all the games and just the amount of time I put into watching and gambling on those college basketball games, that I had a leg up on everybody else, and I had a better chance to win just because I knew more. But that would change the next year when it was probably, I thought, oh, here comes college basketball season. I'm going to win again. And it was like night and day. I lost so much. I couldn't believe it.
What were some of the warning signs or negative consequences that you started to experience that led you to realize that maybe you had a problem with gambling?
I think the first time I realized I had a problem with gambling, besides starting to lose all my money and running up all my credit cards, was when COVID hit and they shut down all the sports. I was actually feeling withdrawal symptoms. Like I was getting shaky because I couldn't find something to bet on. It was crazy. And then when I realized I was betting on these games of countries soccer games of countries I hadn't even heard of before, it was wild. It looked like they were streaming this game from like a flip phone. And then that's when I realized this is a problem, because I'm willing to bet on anything. I just need that rush. This is addictive, and I have a serious issue. I would go on to bet another year and a half, 2 years after that too. Against my favorite teams, that's something I never thought I would ever do. I would bet against my favorite teams, and I would root against my favorite teams because I wanted to win the bet more than I wanted my teams to win, which is also a pretty bad sign.
At the time, did you feel badly about doing that?
It depended if they won or lost. I didn't feel bad about it if I picked the right pick, but afterwards, after I stopped betting, I was like, how could I ever do that? I mean, I'm a Yankees fan, and I'm betting on the Red Sox to beat the Yankees. That's not me.
I'm going to ask you, how common is his story, just in terms of the way he transitioned from gambling for fun to engaging in some of the behaviors that he described, especially in terms of betting on teams that were playing against his favorite teams and things of that nature?
Very common. What I would say to that, this still blows my mind. Because again, I come from the substance use disorder world. This condition is progressive in nature. It starts small. It's like drinking a beer on Friday nights turns to whiskey on Sunday mornings over a span of time. This thing does the same. I heard him speaking about pools, and that's what can open that doorway. And then once you go beyond that, once you go past that point, there's no going back, just like with substance disorders. So I think it's really common. It's progressive in nature. I've experienced this at Fenway. I was watching the Rangers, and some guy was messing with me, rooting for the Rangers with me. And then between innings, he kind of said, man, listen, the only reason I'm going for Texas is because I've got money on the first 3 innings, blah, blah, and then I just shut it down, and okay, well, good luck, But that reminded me, that's the impact the industry is making on, being a fan and the integrity of sports and all that. But the progression of the condition is common, and how it starts and what it can turn to. Believe me, I live in Boston. If a Yankee fan is rooting for the Mets,
Yeah.
that's a condition.
You're taking your life into your own hands.
Yeah.
So, thank you. Saul, you were a huge sports fan, I'm sure, before you ever placed your first bet. When you hear something like what he said about betting against your favorite teams, is that something that you experienced firsthand?
I did experience this phenomenon. I recall just not only how devastating it was to, of course, lose the bet in the moment, but also to feel this betrayal, not only to the team, but to my family. And because it was a huge game that I recall, Rockets and the Warriors in the playoffs, and the Rockets won the game. And so this was one of these once-in-a-moment opportunities to have a bonding experience with my dad and my twin brother, and we're all high-fiving and cheering, and to realize internally that I just lost my credit for the week by betting on the Warriors was not just panic, but also such a guilty and really terrible feeling of betrayal to my family and to that moment. So,
Yeah, you mentioned a specific game and remembering the scores, which is almost a perfect segue to the next video clip that I want to show.
My name is Bobby. I'm originally from Chicago, Illinois. Always been really into sports, almost abnormally. Obviously played when I was young, but really got into watching sports. I was a fanatic. I mean, there's videos of me 2-3 years old watching Sports Center. I even remember watching the same games over and over again as a kid. And then it was something that kind of almost took over my life. Like as I got older, 9, 10, 11, I really got into just knowing everything about it. I remember like my parents would take me to a bar and people would just name a college and I would name the name of their mascot, and it always played. But and then once I got closer to 14, 15, 8th grade, I can still remember my first bet. I bet on a college football game. It was for 2 cents on Bovada, which is an online bookmaker, and I really just got in I was always pretty good with the internet, so I was able to make an account and just fake that I was my dad because we had the same name, and put a 2-cent bet on Boston College plus 28.5, and I won 1 cent.
When you started sports betting, did you have any loyalty to your home teams or to your favorite teams?
It's funny you say that because I think I've seen a lot of these things, like the 20 questions to ask a person who gambles to see if they're addicted in sports. I would say if I were to look back at it from a very introspective lens, the first time I bet against my own team and cheered against my own team was probably the second I should have known I had a problem. Because that's when I took pretty much, I mean, I don't want to put my life into only a sports lens, but when I had devalued my entire fandom for money, like it had kind of thrown away. It's like, what's the point of having money when everything that I care about, I'm devaluing? And it had gotten so bad to the point where, I mean, I was a Vikings fan, and the Minneapolis Miracle, I had money on the Saints, and I was mad that the Vikings won. And if that would have happened 5 years earlier, it would have been probably the happiest day of my life. So,
Comments, thoughts about this? Is this something you see a lot?
My, yes. What I would say about sports betting, and a lot of you might disagree with me. I'm just, again, quoting what I'm seeing. Sports betting, there's just a little bit of a twist or an adjustment. When I'm assessing, of course, I do the general assessment rules, right? And I personally just go down that DSM-9, okay? But when we talk about how they bet, who they bet for, I try to get really nitty gritty, not only with the teams that they're loyal to, but the types of sports they're betting on, like table tennis. And this dude's a football player. Okay, that tells me something. One, I always ask, again, I've got a bunch of Bears fans and I got a bunch of Patriots fans. Do you ever bet for or against the Patriots? I had a guy once, if I have any hockey fans in here, you'll understand. He was a Bruins fan. And I asked him a question right out. I said, listen, dude, would you I didn't say dude, but you understand. I said, would you rather the Bruins win the Cup, Stanley Cup, or would you rather win and he stopped me mid-sentence and said, that's a stupid question. But you know what? I don't know if his action was consistent with what he was telling me because of this condition, But it's important to know if they were betting for or against the teams that they were loyal to, and what type of sporting events and types of sports they were betting, I think is very important too. You've got to get in there, and everybody's different. Everybody's different. You got to get in there to find out what their patterns are, so that you can kind of flex to that in session.
So we often talk about sports bettors, when they begin to bet on sports, they feel that their knowledge and skill almost make the odds irrelevant. Did you experience that when you were attracted to sports betting in the beginning? And then what kind of behaviors did you eventually engage in that your knowledge and skill wasn't even part of the formula?
So in my experience, Jeff, I perpetually had this belief that I was smarter than other people when it came to sports. And interestingly enough, I'd say before I was betting on sports and I was just in a fantasy baseball league, I didn't do excessive studying of data or anything. It was always picking obscure players, hoping that somehow they would be great, so then I could show my friends that I had this intuition, that I had the sixth sense that I would be a superior, fantasy baseball player. And I think when you talk about the knowledge aspect of the sports betting, early on, having success just on intuition was probably the worst thing that could have come my way, because that very first bet I placed, my team was up in baseball 13-0 in the sixth inning, which it's unheard of. And so I think that those early confirmations were certainly reinforcements that I didn't have to study anything. I could just pick a team. And I think that made it even easier to say, this is the magic pill to fix my life, is that I don't even have to read data or something. I was lazy even for someone who was a sports bettor. And so I would say that delusional belief is what kept me also on the hook for so long sure, I was addicted chemically to the action, but the belief that I could make it all back, I think was based on seeing the success earlier by just, I like this Czech team's logo and they won in the first half, so it'll happen again. And I think that's why my betting was so foolish, I guess, to the average person, the habits I had, because I had believed in it. So, yeah.
Okay,
You
thanks.
started issues, okay?
Yeah, I'm Asher. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California, and went to University of Wisconsin-Madison briefly. Graduated in 2020 from undergrad and came back here to LA. I'm 24. I currently work in sports, and I'm living back in LA and working at a university in the athletic department.
Asher, do you think there's a difference in sports betting as compared to other forms of gambling? And if so, what are the differences?
When I joined your group, Jeff, I think I would have said it was just totally different. I don't think it's totally different, but I definitely think there are still some differences. I think the similarities come where it impacts us in a pretty similar way, where it's a different medium, but it still impacts our friends, our families, our time lost, our relationships with everyone around us in the world, our ability to be present in any situation, which for me is probably the biggest thing I've noticed, honestly, that you just can't really notice when you're in it. You're just never present. There's never a time in active addiction where I'm actually present in what I'm doing because I'm always thinking about the bet. There's always a bet I either haven't placed, I'm about to place, I'm in the middle of. So as far as differences though, there are definitely differences in terms of I really thought I had an edge every time I placed a bet. There was never a bet I made where I didn't think I had an edge. And that's even the ridiculous 2K bets I'm talking about. I could still psyop myself into thinking, oh, because I actually, know this player and this is his pixelated video game version of him. I probably know more than this person does, and I'm going to win this bet because of that. And you could always talk yourself into that. And there was never an actual thought in my head of this is just luck or this is just complete chance. That was never why I bet. I bet because I had an edge. And I thought I had an edge all the time. And I think that's something that is unique to sports and maybe poker. But, I mean, you can't really convince me in active addiction that I don't have an edge in a sporting event I'm betting on. And I had to relearn that I actually don't know all the time. And some of it is luck and crazy things happen and I can't really predict it. And it took me way too long to realize that, but I had to learn that lesson over and over and over again. And then, as you were mentioning before we started recording, a big difference is, well, after you're done gambling, how do you go about the world? Because it's a lot easier to avoid a casino than it is to avoid a sports game or like watching a sports game with your friends. Especially if you're a guy that's into sports, it means you have a network of people that are guys who are also into sports, many of which probably also bet on the exact stuff you bet on because it's so accepted. It's accepted to go to the casino, but it's not something you do all the time if you're a normal person. You might do it once in a while on vacation. Betting on a sports game in my generation now is literally you could do it every day and nobody would bat an eye. At least in the circles I was in. If they knew the amounts I was betting, they would, question it. But it's so accepted that you have to relearn your relationship to sports and watching sports, and that's something that's different.
I remember the first time that you told me that the term degenerate gambler among your friends was like a badge of honor and not a derogatory characterization of your gambling.
It was so much a badge of honor, Jeff, that we created an entire podcast and Twitter account that actually did pretty well where we were selling picks, and it was called The Daily Degenerate because we were really proud of that name, and we literally wore that name as a badge of honor for our entire podcast operation and Twitter handicapper operation that we were running in college there.
So what was your reputation while you were gambling among your friends in terms of, just what kind of gambler you were and what was it positive, negative, or is anybody concerned about the level of gambling?
Nobody was concerned about me. I hid the amounts incredibly well. I acted like I was super smart. I acted like I had an edge every time. Everybody knew how much I knew about sports and how much I was into sports, and it was a very different amount than most people, even people that bet on sports. Like I was the one they'd come to for a question. I would get, tons and tons of texts, tons and tons of people asking me in college, should I take this line? Is he playing tonight? What's this coach like? Is this going over or under? Like just so many betting questions. I was kind of the smart guy that really knew sports and was in control of his betting, but bet a lot and was definitely super into betting. I didn't hide that I bet a lot, but I was, considered smart and reasonable and the guy you'd go to for information.
So the last video clip from Asher, which I thought was a good way to conclude this session, I'll title it "The Gift of Recovery." Awesome. Asher, my last question for you is not really a question, but just for you to share. I think it was this past weekend, you sent me a couple of pictures of you and your brother. Tell us where you were, how that felt.
Yeah, I don't think I've watched a full regular season baseball game all year, and I hadn't been to one yet this year. And I got to take my little brother, who's 6, to a Dodger game. One of my favorite things in sports is going to Dodger Stadium. I grew up a Dodger fan. It was really the first entry into sports and love for sports that I had. I'd been going to games since I was 4 or 5, and I got to take him, just me and him, and we had the best time. The game ended up being really fun too, but just to be there with him, we got there, 2 hours early, got to go to batting practice. I got to take him, I missed a couple innings because we were getting soft serve and him a pizza, and that would have set me off the edge if I had bets on the game and I couldn't see what was happening. But, I left my seat in the 5th and got back in like the 7th, which is something that is unheard of for me back in the day. So we had an amazing time, and I got to really be present in that moment for him and enjoy that game with him. And that's what sports is all about to me. And I missed all of that for so long. And, being able to work with these awesome athletes, these college athletes, and then being able to go and enjoy sports and games like that, that's what it's all about. And that's why I fell in love with it in the first place. And I'm really grateful to be back to doing that now after a little over a year in recovery.
So what I hope comes through, and I know Saul and Robby feel the same way, from this conversation is that gambling addiction isn't a single story. It affects people at every age and every profession and from every background, including young adults. But the common thread is that recovery is possible, but we have to listen, we have to connect, and we have to create spaces where people feel seen and supported. And with young adults, in my view, we have to go where they are, because the approaches that worked for me may not work for them. They are very much into social media, very much into social groups with betting. And we have to remember that, acknowledge it, and tailor their own recovery path that fits their needs and their lifestyle. So we only have 2 minutes left for questions, but I don't feel guilty because I encouraged you to ask questions during the session, and not one person did. So anyway, I'm kidding. So if anybody has any questions, as long as the food doesn't get cold for lunch.
Hi, Jeff.
Hi.
So I don't know when you shot those videos, but have you done any follow-up with Asher on how he's doing now that the Dodgers have won the World Series and what that was like for him? I mean, that's like a real risk factor for him, is these really high-profile games.
I can tell you that Asher's recovery, in my view, and how I measure recovery, has been very positive. He's had a couple of slips that were unrelated to major sporting events. But the interesting thing about Asher is you heard him say that he worked in college sports, and that was his dream. Since recovery, he reevaluated his future and now works in an entirely different field because he made the decision that he didn't want to work for sports anymore given the current environment. Yeah.
Well, we are at our time, and it's lunch. I want to thank all 3 of you. This is important work that each of you do, and please extend our gratitude to your folks sharing their stories. That takes a lot of courage, and so really appreciate it.
Thank you.